Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at another DDR5 setup with the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D. This time using a G.Skill Trident Z5 Neo RGB 2x16GB 6000 CL28 kit, which was provided by G.Skill, so big thank you to them for the memory. The kit uses Hynix 16GB A-die memory chips in a single rank configuration. And the motherboard I'm using is a Asus Crosshair X870E Hero, which was provided by Asus, so big thank you to them for the motherboard. Now, the previous video with this CPU, it was in 2-to-1 mode and doing DDR5-8000 CL34. And the 2-to-1 mode on this CPU works great as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I haven't had much success trying to run it above 8000, but like I also have a chip that doesn't run 8000 at all, so that being a 90, like my 9950X. But so and also I didn't really have like a massive issue stabilizing the 2-to-1 mode setup. 1-to-1 mode, on the other hand, with this CPU is a massive disappointment. That's kind of the nicest way I can put it. So, I mean, this is not as bad as the 7800X 3D in my daily system, but it's almost there. So the funny thing with this chip is it kind of works at 6400. Like, I even managed to get Prime 95 to run DDR5 6400 for like 10 hours without erroring out, but that was at like horrible settings. So that was like CL32, which for a memory kit like this, that's just like on paper, this memory kit should be able to run CL30 at 1.4 volts. And I was stress testing CL32 at that voltage. With like TRCD38, like just awful everything. Well, mainly the primaries were horrible. Also like auto nitro mode, just it was not great. And that was also at like 1.3 volts SoC. And that passed once, and then I was like, oh, I'll try like tighten the settings, because with a kit like this being a 6000 CL28, I was really hoping to do like a 6400 CL26 setup or something. But I can't get this CPU to even pass Prime 95 at 6200 CL26, which is trivial on like other CPUs that I have. Like I've honestly never encountered this before with a Ryzen chip where it's like it kind of works at high frequencies in 1-to-1 mode, but you can't tighten the timings, you can't touch nitro mode, you can't disable gear down mode, you can't like you try to do anything to make it like faster and it just immediately starts to complain in terms of stability. Because the funny thing is, like, I can run benchmarks at 6400. Can't run Prime 95 though. And I ultimately gave up on the 6400 setup when I went back to the 6400 CL32 settings and it decided to error out in 7 minutes, at which point I was just like, okay, I have no idea what is going on with this CPU. It's just being incredibly stupid. So, and like I mentioned, yeah, like I'm on 231 nitro settings. Just this CPU is just a massive disappointment. Though, well, we're at 6200, so the PHY RDLs are of course matched because the training setting for that doesn't get adjusted until 6400. But yeah, so massive disappointment. You'll also notice I actually ended up running Prime 95 for 19 hours here because with the experiences I've had with this CPU so far, where it's just like it's just a horrible mess in 1-to-1 mode. I decided to run more Prime 95 because that was previously the main thing that was constantly just complaining about stability at 6400 or even at like 6200 CL28. Like I couldn't get 6200 CL28 to work. Like this CPU, like maybe it's a motherboard issue, but I already complained about like dealing with the CPU on the X870E Taichi in 1-to-1 mode where like it was just being weird. And maybe the ASRock and the Asus motherboard both have the same weirdness. Like I haven't tried the CPU on an MSI board yet, but at this point I'm like, I'm noticing a trend. I use the CPU and things don't work the way I expect them to work. So it's probably the CPU. And yeah, so ultimately the settings I've ended up with are the new like easy Hynix timings for ADI that I've made. Because I mean, I guess that's a nice little validation of like, hey, these timings are really reliable. These settings are very reliable because yeah, they do just work. Um, but I'm also just so incredibly disappointed that like this is awful. I mean, it's not awful. But it is disappointing. It is very very like I'm this CPU as far as I'm concerned is holding the memory kit back. Also, I did try to run like 2200 FCLK. It doesn't like that. It just kind of doesn't like anything that makes it go faster in 1-to-1 mode. Um, right, like it doesn't like nitro. Like I mentioned, nitro settings, gear down mode, high FCLK, any of these things, and it just starts to error out in Prime 95. And um, yeah, I'm done. Like I am simply not going to tune 1-to-1 mode on this CPU because this seems like a completely lost cause. I mean, I will still try it on an MSI board, but if it doesn't just immediately clear up, then like I give up because this is ridiculous. Especially when the 2-to-1 mode on this chip does just work. Like 8000 CL30 was trivial to set up. Um, so, yeah, I don't know if you had a chip like this, unless you had a terrible motherboard and a really weak memory kit, which is a possibility. Like, there are, like, I have ADI kits that simply will not do DDR5 8000, but if you have a good motherboard and a good memory kit with a chip like this, there is absolutely no reason to be in 1-to-1 mode and having to deal with this. Um, just and then like the worst part is like okay, so 6200 CL30, this is also just slower than 8000 CL34 or even CL38. So anyway, but yeah, so no errors in hardware info. Ran Y Cruncher for like 3 hours just in case. Mind you, when I run Y Cruncher, I have it on the auto like memory allocation, so the run times are not consistent because it's using too much memory. And so basically the memory allocation conflicts with Windows, and that makes it slow down and speed up. And also just having hardware info running at the same time also affects the run times, which is annoying. But yeah, and then there's the 19 hours of Prime 95. And also you might notice that the system has been running for several days now because I've been procrastinating on talking about what a disappointment this is. Like, I don't like showing mediocre memory settings in videos. On the flip side, you could probably like on the flip side, these settings like should also work on basically any CPU. I mean, as long as you can do 6200, because there are chips that won't do 6200 1-to-1 mode, right? Like my 7800 X3D is even worse than this 9800 X3D. So if I tried to run these settings on that chip, they also wouldn't work. But on basically any other CPU I own, this will work. Just this is not going to be an issue. So yeah. Anyway, at this point, I guess we're gonna go take a look into the BIOS. Because yeah, like I just want to get this video done and over with, and move on to testing things that don't fill me with sadness. The Silicon Lottery just is the worst thing. As far as I'm concerned, the Silicon Lottery is the worst part of overclocking. I simply cannot wait. I think the best CPU I have on like sheer silicon quality is an FX 9590. And actually, that's not even true. It's just like one core on that entire chip that's good. The rest of it's also not good. Anyway, so here we are in the BIOS. And admittedly, a lot of this is set to auto. So what's nice is Asus has now stopped setting the SoC voltage straight to 1.3 volts on auto. That's cool. But I would have used 1.25 anyway for 6200. But yeah, when I was testing, like the funny thing with this chip is that 6400 is equally like if we compare this to say something like my 9950X, which doesn't behave so strangely as this CPU does, if you keep lowering the SoC voltage, at some point it just stops being stable. This CPU never gets stable. Like, obviously, there's an SoC voltage at which 6400 doesn't work at all in 1-to-1 mode, but above that, the stability never really improves. Like from 1.2 volts all the way up to 1.3 volts, it still gets random errors in Prime 95 in anything from a couple minutes to a couple hours into the test, which is just infuriating. So yeah, anyway, 1.25 SoC. Like basically, I get like these 6200 CL30 setup here is like this is me giving up, right? So that's why a lot of the settings are just on auto. I did try messing with VDDIO, and VDDP and VDDQ, and just like nothing I tried was helping. Like this, yeah. Like it could maybe be something to do with the BIOS on this board. It's on 0706, but that's the latest BIOS. At least at the time that, I was working on this, it was the latest BIOS. I don't know if it is at the time of recording the video. And yeah, and it just like it would just error out at random, at like random amounts of time. Sometimes it wouldn't even post, which was really surprising because like I'd punch in settings that weren't really anything special, and then it would just hang on initialization. And actually, so yeah, so this just has been a huge frustration for me. And for some reason, like the CPU also, like, so it complains about, like, if I lower the cast latency too much, it complains about it. I did try lower TRCD values. Like that usually just causes Prime 95 instability. I tried lowering TRP. I'm like, it could be the memory kit, but in my experience with Hynix A-die kits, it really shouldn't be the memory kit. Like you should be able to run lower TRP than what I was testing with, but yeah, I don't know. Until I try this memory kit with a CPU that isn't this, I won't know. So anyway, so the primaries here are basically compatibility mode as far as I'm concerned. This isn't like, oh, I'm really pushing the memory, like limits of, well, to be fair, you could find some Hynix A-die kits that might require TRCD 38 at 6200, but that is extremely unlikely. Yeah, but the, like, TRP 32, like these are, like I would expect these timings, well, the cast latency might be a bit of an issue. Like obviously this is a 6000 CL28 kit, so G.Skill already bins it for better cast latency at the factory. So yeah, I can run CL30 at 1.4 volts, and occasionally you'll find sticks that won't want to do that at 6200. But this kit should actually be capable of running even 6400 at CL30, and 1.4 volts. But yeah, so these are basically compatibility mode timings as far as I'm concerned. Then TRC set to match TRAS plus TRP. TWR at 48 because that doesn't go any lower. Refresh interval completely maxed out because I do have a fan on this. If you wanted to get rid of the fan, you would just run this at like 50,000 instead. But since I do have a fan, we can run it at 65,000. Which the performance gain from that is relatively negligible because even at 50,000 refresh interval with a TRFC of 416, less than 1% of the available clock cycles are spent on refresh. So going from, what is it, like 0.8% refresh time to 0.6% this is not really going to drastically change anything. Might be like 0.6 something like that. But like if you want to calculate it, you just take your refresh interval, your refresh cycle, and divide it by the refresh interval, and that gives you how many clock cycles are spent on refresh. And yeah, once you set the refresh interval to like 50,000, raising it more than that doesn't tend to really do much for performance. But it also doesn't hurt. And if you have a fan on the memory, there's no reason that you couldn't run 65,000. Especially when you're at like 1.4 volts or something. And then TRTP at 12, which it might go a bit lower, but honestly, I don't want to take my chances with this CPU. The CPU might actually complain about that. Anyway, TRDL at 8, TRDS at 4. This is just the typical values I use for these two. TFAW at 20. Now, funnily enough, Asus boards don't seem to enforce the usual... Right, yeah, they don't enforce a TFAW register limit, which doesn't really make sense, because, I'm relatively certain that the CPU, like, the funny thing is, for timings where the register limit isn't enforced, I'm pretty sure what happens if you set it too low is that the motherboard just, like, the CPU just rounds that up to the nearest valid value. So it would just be 20 internally anyway, but anyway, then we have TWTRL, which is at 14, and WTRS at 4. Pretty standard for 6200 on Hynix 16 gigabit A die. RDRDS-CL at 4. Mind you, I did try RDRDS-CL at 6 when I was trying 6400 with the CPU, but that doesn't help. That didn't help. Like nothing I tried, like nothing I tried made the behavior at 6400 more consistent. So yeah, I don't like. Well, I still have some ideas on things I could try, but they're all things that would actually probably just make performance worse. Which, at that point, it's just like, okay, why even bother? WRWRSCL at 4. I just like to set it to be the same as the read to read. Funnily, I kind of suspect AMD CPUs don't really use this timing. Because, yeah, it doesn't really have much performance impact. And it also really doesn't affect stability, even if you set it to 1. But I feel weird about doing that. TWRRD at 4, RDWR at 16. This is just typical Hynix things for 6200. And if your CPU didn't suck, you could try set this to buffered, and then you'd get gear down mode disabled. Like, I've tried that with a CPU, and it does not tend to go well. And then the rest of the settings down here, I haven't adjusted anything. Well, other than setting UCLK equals MCLK. And then you do have to do this, because if you just go up to 6200 without setting that manually, the board will default to 2-to-1 mode as soon as you go above 6000. And that is going to ruin performance. Well, it's not going to be as bad as it was on, like, the DDR4 CPUs, but it's not good, being in 2-to-1 mode at low frequencies. So, yeah, that's basically it, because this is what giving up looks like. It's just like, I'm not going to try to tune anything. I'm just going to punch in settings that are basically an advanced XMP profile and call it a day. Or should I say Expo? Doesn't really make a difference. Yeah. Now, admittedly, with the Nitro settings, I only really tried messing with them when I was at 6400, so maybe there is a chance that at 6200 setting Nitro RX to 1 instead of 2 would work, and that would give a nice little performance uplift. But I'm so done with the CPU. So no, we're not doing that. Yeah, this just massive disappointment. Also, the VDDP by default is 0.95, which is a perfectly acceptable value. Yeah. Anyway, so this is like basically easy timings is what this is. And also, like, I really need to test this memory kit with a different CPU, because I am 99% certain that it's being held back by this 9800X3D, because this is just ridiculous. Like, I shouldn't be stuck at CL30 on a memory kit binned for 6000 CL28. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. So, yeah. Gotta say though, it is kind of like, it's a new experience for me to have a CPU like this, because I have other chips where if you put them into, like, if they're in 1-to-1 mode and you push them too far, they just completely fall apart. You don't get that, oh, like, it was stable for 7 hours and then it errored out, and then it errored out in 6 minutes, and then it errored out in 3 hours, and then it errored out in 10 hours, and then it errored out in 1 minute, and then it didn't even want to post, and then, like, this kind of floppy behavior of, like, barely functional to, like, kind of looking stable. This is more like an Intel CPU than my usual 1-to-1 mode Ryzen experience. So this was kind of like, you know, a discovery, if you will, of like, whoa, you can get chips that, like, are really inconsistent in 1-to-1 mode. Whereas all of my other chips, it's like they either work or they don't. So yeah. Anyway, that's it for the video. Like, yeah. Like, because I guess because the CPU is so bad, you could probably copy these settings with confidence that, you know, you'd have to really lose the silicon lottery to have to have this not work. Um, but yeah, that's, you know, it's not really what I was aiming for when I set out to test this memory kit with this motherboard and this CPU. So, I'm very disappointed with how this ended up. Um, Even like it is what's funny though, it's worth noting that pushing this a bit further is not going to be like massively faster, especially not an X3D chip where memory performance is not anywhere near as important as on the non-X3Ds. So, like this is more of an academic disappointment than like, oh no, gaming performance is ruined type deal. It's like it's really not. Um, but Yeah, so it's mostly just me being disappointed. Kind of like how I get disappointed when I measure two high-end motherboards and find that they both have the same voltage regulation, and it's like, oh, well, I was hoping one of them would be better. Well, anyway, yeah, that's it for the video. So I guess thanks for watching. Thank you, G-Skill and Asus, for the hardware. And if you'd like to support the channel, there are links in the description that you could check out. That would be very much appreciated. And that's it for the video. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.